Welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. Yeah, big hello to everyone, whether you be listening on Dark Matter Digital Network, Alien Dreams or Deep Talk Radio. We're going to go straight to our guest today to talk about vaccines, chemtrails and alternative energy. So our next guest has made his presence felt in many of our episodes. Mateus Jaguar is the pianist in our intro music at the start of each episode. But he's also an activist and would like to give an introduction to some matters close to his heart, with a view to returning at a later stage to maybe go more in depth on a particular topic. So we'll just give an introduction to the topics today. But welcome to Truth Sentinel, Mateus. Good to have you.
Thank you so much, Scott. It's great to be here.
Before we get down to some main topics, I know there was a few comments you wanted to make on some sort of general news you had.
Well, just something very light to get started with. Regarding this Serena Williams, who won the tennis championship a couple weeks ago, I've been aware for a long time that she's a transgender. She was born a man. Her father, who was a tennis devotee, specifically gave him a sex change and trained her from childhood to infiltrate the professional women's tennis world. And it's just such a scam. It's total fraud. And it's completely unfair that you've got the boys beating up on the girls.
It's an interesting idea. I have heard of things like this before, and also with Obama's wife. But I wonder, could this just be just people who don't particularly like these women or are being a bit unkind?
Well, you're not allowed, as far as Obama is concerned, you're not allowed to become president unless there is some conspiracy that is controlling you. So in Obama's case, it very well may be that he's blackmailed and controlled by the fact that he has a first lady with balls. And as far as this Serena Williams is concerned, it sounds crazy at first until you have an open mind and look at what is available for documentary speculation and circumstantial evidence and direct analysis and fact. And so a really good YouTube video for both of those, it's a documentary called Irrefutable Proof That Serena Williams is a Man, and they also made a documentary, Irrefutable Proof That Michelle Obama is a Man. And it very specifically breaks down the physiological differences in proportions of the physical structure of a man and a woman. And if you check out those videos, I thought the whole thing was a joke at first, and just almost, I don't even know why I bothered watching it, just thought it was ridiculous. And then to my surprise, I started becoming convinced about it. And so right now, personally, every time I see Michelle Obama or Serena Williams, I fully 100% get it that these are men. I could be wrong, but why not check out some of the information?
I think it throws up some interesting ideas anyway, and some interesting questions. Like, if Michelle Obama was a man, some would argue, would it really matter? But if Venus Williams was a man, I think there'd be a bit more of a dispute, because I think there have been occasions in sport where this actually has happened and people were disqualified. I wonder in the future whether, with the more acceptance of transgender roles, whether there will be people that would argue it shouldn't matter. But of course it probably should when it comes to sport, because there's obviously physiological advantages for being a man. I guess with Venus, though, I mean, I heard some stories that her father has admitted this. Do you know that to be the case or not?
I only know that there's some well put together, convincing documentaries that claim that, but I haven't in depth personally investigated this. So I am going on how convincing other people's arguments are.
For me, like the measurements, I would probably need more the measurements about Venus, because there are some women who are a bit more butch, and Venus obviously has got a sort of larger bone structure. I think it would come down to the hospital. The only people who would truly know would be the hospital when she was born. And with Michelle Obama, it wouldn't entirely surprise me. Actually, it probably would surprise me, but I do know that there's one guy that says Obama's gay, and that wouldn't totally surprise me. But Michelle Obama previously been a man, a transgender. Well, I don't know really. It'd be difficult to prove without literally going up and checking for yourself. I mean, I'm in Thailand, so I'm getting used to transgender people around me all the time. But it wouldn't be impossible. I would with Michelle Obama. What would you think would be the issue? Would it be the lying then?
The main issue is that it results in the president being controllable and blackmailable, because we're not quite ready for a first lady with balls.
Or do you think Obama might reveal that on his way out?
I don't think that they would want to admit that they were lying for 8 years.
No, you're probably right. Although Hillary Clinton lies continuously and it doesn't do her any harm.
Well, that's a whole other psychopathic investigation into the abnormalities of power obsession and money junkiism. And that woman is a very dangerous person.
She is, yeah, for sure. How about we move on to our first main topic, which we're going to talk about, which was vaccines. I know you've been involved in activism in this area, and I wanted to ask you how you got involved and what sparked your interest in this particular topic.
Yeah, this is probably the closest topic to my heart, because there's so many people that are being unnecessarily injured every year. And how I got started in it was during the 2008-2009 H1N1 swine flu pandemic. The German population found out that there was 2 different vaccines that Germany had purchased. And there was one vaccine for the masses, and there was another vaccine for the army and the politicians. And GlaxoSmithKline produced Pandemrix and sold 50 million doses that contained a controversial ingredient called aluminum adjuvant. And then a company called Baxter sold a cleaner vaccine called Clevapan, which contained no aluminum adjuvant and was for the army and the politicians. So the civilian population found out about this and refused to take their vaccines. They were all donated lovingly to brown people in poor countries. They can take the dangerous vaccine. And then they had to reorder 50 million more doses of the clean vaccine.
Is this all documented and provable?
Oh yeah, this is a part of a lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court. This is very much in the public record. Mm-hmm. So at the same time as that was happening, in Austria, there was a microbiologist that did a test of a batch of H1N1 vaccines that were passing through a distribution hub intended to go to 6 other EU countries. And she found out that they all had live, unattenuated H1N1 swine flu, which means that anyone who took that shot have a very likely chance of getting H1N1. There was nothing about that shot that was designed to protect you from getting it. It was just a delivery mechanism, like a full-strength swine flu, fully healthy, fully active, virulent virus. So this was a plot to spread H1N1. And so this plot was foiled because this woman who was not scheduled to do this job, who just literally volunteered to do some extra work at the end of her shift because she was ahead of schedule. So they weren't able to create the real pandemic they wanted through this process. So the next thing that happened is that live H1N1 was released on public transit in Austria. So these two events brought charges against GlaxoSmithKline. Charges were brought like crimes against humanity, conspiracy to spread this epidemic and to commit mass murder. And it was very exciting to watch this court case. And like every day I would like tune back in and get all the information of the court case. And it was very exciting, like a soap opera playing out. It's like, oh, today we had a victory. The judge allowed this motion to pass. And oh, the next day, oh, we had a bit of a defeat where we weren't allowed to bring this evidence. And surprisingly, the people were winning this, and it was escalating up the court system, and it made it all the way up to the Supreme Court before it was finally kind of squashed by the powers that be.
Which country was this?
Austria is where the female microbiologist discovered the conspiracy to spread live H1N1 through the vaccines into 6 countries. And this is also where the public transit was exposed. Now, this is so outrageous. This is why this was part of the lawsuit, is because a biological substance, like a weaponized virus, like H1N1, it's classified under a bio level 4 safety requirements. So you're only allowed to mess around with this stuff in an underground facility that has all sorts of barriers between where you're working and the outside world. It's armed, guarded, like there's machine gun armed guards, and the whole facility has to be wired up that it can self-destruct, like in the movies, if there was ever like a terrorist attack was like actively in the process of stealing the stuff, or there was some sort of major leak. It's very strict how you're allowed to handle these materials. And by the way, the reason that they're allowed to handle them is it's always the same excuse. It's like, okay, well, what if our enemies weaponize a biological strain and attack us with it? Well, we have to have something to counter it with. So they're legally allowed to be playing around with these potentially pandemic-creating man-made weaponized virus strains, but they're only allowed to do it under really strict conditions. So the idea that there's a suitcase full of this stuff on public transit is completely illegal. Then the suitcase is dropped and it opens, which is very unlikely. And then the contents in the suitcase that contain the full strength live H1N1 then are open to the air in the public transit. Like, it's so obvious this was intentional. And it happened just after they were, the conspiracy to spread the pandemic through the hub with the microbiologist failed.
And they're saying this was an accident, yeah?
Yeah, just outrageous. This is so on its face outrageous. Now, this is why the court case didn't just get squashed right away. This is why it was so successful. It went on for months. And it was looking like there might actually result in prosecution for conspiracy intent to commit like mass murder. It looked like the people in charge of this might end up getting the death penalty like in any country that applies to them. Very serious case.
And can people, if people type in some of these details onto Google, they'll be able to find information about this, yeah?
Yeah, it's readily available.
Okay. And what would you say would have been the reason to release this vaccine, to release this virus in the public?
Well, it's just like any other major global event. It's not just one agenda. It's usually like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different agendas that are all crossing paths to create the perfect storm. And so this would serve many purposes. From the completely corrupt anti-human vaccine manufacturing industrial complex, then of course it's just the best thing they could ever imagine for their business, to have like a world pandemic where everybody needs to have a vaccine from them. From the perspective of the controlling governments of the world that are afraid that they're losing control, they do like the idea of having a medical martial law over everybody. They like the idea of setting up a precedent where everybody in the world that's under their direct control has to shoot something into their vein if they say so.
Do you think it will come to that point where they'll be forcing people to have vaccines?
Well, they want to. They're trying to. They're making good progress in California right now. Don't forget, the World Health Organization, back during the swine flu, during 2008-2009, the World Health Organization recommended that all of its member countries vaccinate all of their populations. So it was a recommendation. They didn't have the force of New World Order law to back it up with teeth, but it was the recommendation. And I live in Canada. The Canadian Health Minister recommended 100% of the Canadian population take the H1N1 vaccine. That kind of woke me up right there, partially because 100%? Are you sure? No, 100%. That includes people that have had known life-threatening anaphylactic shock reactions to the ingredients that are in that vaccine. This includes everybody that is too young or too old to benefit from a vaccine. This includes pregnant women that have high-risk pregnancies. This is outrageous. The fact that they want to have everybody vaccinated just proves to you that they're not actually trying to help the people. They have an agenda to push these vaccines. By the way, in Canada, 10,000 pregnant Canadian women were given a safer vaccine.
So they were given a different one, yeah?
Yeah. And the reason is because the H1N1 vaccine is so dangerous that it would actually abort enough pregnancies to raise too much attention. So, like, they don't like to go too fast. It's like the agenda is to slowly wage this chemical warfare against the population, to slowly wear us down, slowly dumb us down, slowly weaken us, which, if you just step back and take a look, like, just look at the States, for example, you know, where they were like 100 years ago, a bunch of like healthy, strong, independent people with like a fire burning in their eyes, and having the courage, you know, 200 years ago, 250 years ago, you know, having the courage to face down the world's superpower and win. And now everybody just docile and unhealthy and allergic to everything, and the vaccines play a role in that.
And what would you say to critics who would say that this is kind of fear-mongering, and that some serious diseases in the past have been eradicated through vaccine programs? Well,
in the past, there was some attempts to use vaccine technology for the best interest of the population. So whatever successes, like especially early successes we may have had or have had, that was partially because they were honestly trying their best. They weren't putting mercury in the vaccines. They weren't putting aluminum adjuvant. They weren't putting formaldehyde. They were just putting the minimum amount of an attenuated vaccine to give you the best possible chance of being able to create antibodies against it. So that's part of it. Now, the problem is now they're not trying their best anymore. There's a different overlapping agenda. There's way, way more money to be made in the pharmaceutical industrial complex if you have people with compromised immune systems, lifelong compromised immune systems. And by the way, anyone who took the H1N1 vaccine has a 3 times greater chance for the rest of their life of catching the regular seasonal flu. It's called the Canadian problem, that other countries in Australia, some universities in Australia, in Europe, and in the States, we're studying why is it that in Canada, anyone who took the H1N1 vaccine is catching the regular flu 3 times more. And then the most recent update to that last year is that more research is done in other university and facilities around the world. And they realized, oh, actually, it's not just a Canadian problem. It actually was everybody that took it.
I think for me, one of the problems is that the surveys and the data that you hear on topics, someone else can produce surveys and data to say the opposite. That's what makes things confusing. But we don't have time to talk more on this topic, although there's so much more to say. But I wanted to ask people listening as to what they thought about vaccines and whether they would take it and whether they would give it to their children. So maybe if you're listening, you can write in the chat room on our website at www.truthsentinel.co.uk. But we're going to move on to another topic now, which I know you're also interested in, Mateus, which is chemtrails, or to give it a more academic name, geoengineering. It's something we haven't covered on Truth Sentinel yet, so I'd be interested to hear your views on it.
Chemtrails is a slang, weaponized word. So if you say chemtrails, then you're just a crazy conspiracy theorist. But if you refer to it in the same way that the people that are engaging in this conspiracy refer to it, then you're taken seriously. So what they call it, the people that are behind this they call it 2 things, either geoengineering or persistent condensation trails. And when you look up those and start researching those, then you can start accessing information that they use to communicate amongst themselves. So I got into this, my mother knew about this 4 years before telling me, about 23 years ago. And then 17 years ago, she told me about it. And ever since then, I've been documenting it, taking pictures, taking videos, researching any existing documentaries. And I just live and breathe, I literally breathe the aluminum oxide particles every day. But this topic, I consider myself an expert on. And we're in a really interesting time right now where there is a critical mass approaching of awakening here.
Could you explain the difference between, say, contrails and chemtrails?
Right. A contrail is what naturally occurs under certain circumstances from, for example, a passenger jet airline will have a hot engine, maybe 700 degrees. It'll be spewing out hot exhaust vapors. Then if there's an appropriate amount of existing ambient moisture and a certain appropriate amount of atmospheric pressure, then the moisture that's in the atmosphere will change form after interacting with the hot engine vapors and become a visible vapor, then which you can see, and that's the tail of an airplane. Then the airplane flies away. Those vapors are then losing the energy from the engine exhaust, losing the heat energy. They resume the ambient cold temperature that exists up at that height, and they're no longer visible. And typically, this will happen in about 30 seconds to 90 seconds. It's pretty normal. So when you're looking at a normal contrail or condensation trail, you'll be watching, like a little tadpole type of a shape where the one end is constantly attached to the airplane, of course, and the other end is disappearing at the same speed that the airplane is flying, just with a delay of about 30 seconds. So that's a regular contrail. A chemtrail is slang for chemical trail instead of condensation trail, and it's just chemical trail because what you're seeing from a chemtrail is actually heavier than air aluminum oxide particles that are about 2 to 3 microns.
And skeptics would say that what some people are calling chemtrails because of the way they stay in the air longer are just being affected by the atmospheric conditions around at that particular time, that maybe the atmospheric conditions on that day mean that the trail's going to stay there longer. What would you say to that?
Well, you can't change physics just because you want to deny geoengineering. If they're claiming that it's a condensation trail, and if anyone knows what a condensation trail understands that it's a very temporary phenomenon that's created through the heat changing of the engine going through the atmosphere, then when the heat source leaves, then obviously the condensation trail would no longer be visible. The fact that it can stay visible for hours and hours is on its face evidence that it's not vapor. But maybe I could go into some of the ways of telling the difference between the two.
Yeah, and also I wanted to ask whether you think perhaps some people's skepticism about this topic is because of the name chemtrail. Like, it's a bit like the phrase conspiracy theory. If you just type geoengineering into Google and Wikipedia, you get a much more academic response. If you type chemtrail in, you get all the people discrediting it.
Oh, definitely. Like, chemtrail is a weaponized word, like conspiracy theorists. Okay, look, the Russian government admits that they used airplanes to spray silver particles to control the weather for their last military parade. Okay, the Russian government position. Now, they're bragging about that they used silver particles because silver particles is like colloidal silver. Like, nano-sized particles of silver is actually good for you. So they're just bragging that they used a healthy form of it. Okay, the Chinese government admits that during the Chinese Olympics that we just had, that they used airplanes to spray the aluminum particles to give the best possible weather conditions for the Olympics. So that's just the way to get started on this, to find out that it's not a crazy conspiracy theorist. This is a technology that's being used officially by major world powers, admitting using it for weather control. They're not admitting that they're using it on a wide scale for some nefarious black project that's being that's not being disclosed, but they are admitting that the technology exists and that they are using it. The first time this technology was used on a large scale was during the Vietnam War. The U.S. military sprayed cloud seeding substances, similar to what's being used now, over the Vietnamese supply roads, creating ungodly, unnatural torrential downpour, which washed out these key dirt supply roads. And now, it wasn't illegal then, there was no law against it, but after the Vietnam War, the United Nations got together and they all signed treaties with each other that from now on it's illegal to use the weather as a weapon. And so that's right now part of international law, is it's a war crime to use geoengineering or persistent condensation trails as part of a strategy of waging war from one nation to the other. But nobody signed anything saying that you can't do it to your own people. So technically, it's legal. But the problem is that if they admitted that they're doing it to us, it would be so unpopular that they wouldn't be able to continue because of the fact that nanoparticle-sized aluminum adjuvant is extremely unhealthy for a human.
Personally, I would say it's definitely happening, at least on a small scale. But how wide scale do you think this is happening?
It's happening on such a wide scale that the conspiracy is being partially protected by the enormity of the conspiracy. It's such a all-pervasive program that if a person is first being introduced to it, they immediately have this idea that it just couldn't be true. It's too big. There couldn't be collaboration like that. And that's what's allowing it to get away successfully for as long as it has. But the thing is that truth is stranger than fiction. Conspiracies do exist on a large scale, and we are being controlled by a very few. It just sounds so crazy. We're so controlled and propagandized as a population that we're just literally from our first childhood TV exposure all the way through our adulthood, we're being programmed to go with the official story, and the official story is that it's not happening, but it is.
And definitely there are some chemicals being sprayed as experiments as well. I mean, you only have to go onto BBC and type in anthrax spray US subway, and recently an anthrax-based compound was sprayed unknowingly on commuters in a US subway just to test how it would spread. It wasn't actually lethal version of anthrax, but it was linked to anthrax. But that's true, and I think if people had known that was going on, I think there'd be a lot of people who wouldn't have been happy with that. Just time for a quick break to tell you a bit about this show and let you know about some up-and-coming guests. Hello, I'm Scott, host of Truth Sentinel. We do weekly podcast shows covering topics connected to psychology, philosophy, political corruption, conspiracies, mysteries, world events, paranormal, and scientific advancements. Our episodes are recorded from diverse locations such as the UK, Ukraine, Israel, Egypt, Kazakhstan, Portugal, Vietnam, and Thailand. Find us on YouTube and also listen to us on the networks. Feel free to make a donation or buy a t-shirt, which gives us a small donation too. Use the code TRUTH1 for a 10% discount. Thanks for listening. That 10% discount for t-shirts can be found at trutht-shirts.com. That's trutht-shirts.com, and use the code TRUTH1 to get your 10% discount, and we get that small donation. You can also make donations at our website as well. I also wanted to talk to you about some up-and-coming guests that we're going to be having on. We're going to be talking to Brian Dunning from Skeptoid website, and we're going to be discussing conspiracies and world events and things like MH370. Also going to be having the great man himself, the Dice Man, Luke Reinhardt. Check out the book that was written in the 1970s, which changed the world and was a cult bestseller. It's about a man who throws a dice to decide everything he does. We're talking about the philosophy behind that and about his new book, which touches on a lot of the topics we talk on our show. And we're going to be talking to Samantha Scarlett, who has her own paranormal podcast and is a grunge rock star, basically. And we're going to be hopefully talking to Tracy Twyman about secret societies. So lots of interesting guests, as well as having our usual chat discussion shows, which we have at least 2 a month. So I hope you join us and check us out again at www.truthsentinel.co.uk. I'm actually going to be on that website later. Just write in the chat box and I'll be waiting for your messages. And you can also leave a voicemail there. Thanks for listening. Let's get on with today's show anyway.
So the final thing I'd like to say about chemtrails is how you can identify the difference between a condensation trail and a geoengineering chemical-based trail. Okay, a regular trail will always have one end attached to an airplane. That's a condensation trail. A chemical trail will only have one end attached to an airplane as long as the chemical canister still has particles in it. As soon as that canister is exhausted, the trail stops and the plane flies on. Now, it may activate another canister and there may be some dashes, but quite often you just see one gigantic bomb run where the plane is making no trail whatsoever. It turns on, it sprays across half of the visible sky, and then it just abruptly stops. The plane flies along, flies out of sight, and that'll just sit there. That's how you know. The other way is that if you ever see a curved trail, it's highly probable that that is not a natural condensation trail because jet fuel is very expensive, time is money, and commercial aircraft, they go in straight lines unless there's some sort of emergency or there's some sort of congestion problem at the airport. But if you just see like a cruising altitude large aircraft that's leaving a long, long trail and it's way up at cruising altitude, like you can barely see the craft, and then it starts doing a curve and just like changes direction, that's not normal because they plan their routes from the point of takeoff. They don't go 500 kilometers in one direction and then do a 45 or 90 degree turn and keep on going. As soon as they take off, as soon as they get to a safe climbing altitude, they immediately point in a straight line to their direction to save gas. The other way is that if it's not disappearing in 30 seconds to 90 seconds, if it's not disappearing, keep watching it, because that right there is telling you that it's not water vapor. And another thing that is very obvious is you got to remember that aluminum is heavier than air, of course, whereas condensation, like vapor, like hot moisture that turns into steam, is lighter than air. It goes up. So it's very simple. A regular trail actually goes up a little bit before it disappears, and a chemical trail actually falls down a little bit. And it's so obvious. Like, it's like a magician's trick. Like, as soon as you see the trick, then you can never be fooled again, and you'll just be, for the rest of your life, wondering how everyone else can't see it. It's so obvious. What happens is the trail is laid, and the bottom part of the trail starts billowing downwards. The top part of the trail isn't so obvious that it's going down because it's falling away from the bottom. And there's literally like clumps of particles that are falling unevenly. And so you literally see like pillow-shaped billowing falling down. When you see dashing, there are circumstances where that can be natural and coming from a normal commercial airplane, from a condensation trail. So you could have a circumstance where you have different ridges of pressure and temperature. Maybe there's a section of like hot air rising, that like an eagle would be riding. And it is possible that a regular vapor trail, condensation trail, could be making a visible trail in the colder section and then pass through a warmer section and not make a trail and then go back to making a trail. So that does happen occasionally, but that's not common. That happens like very rarely. Whereas with chemical trails, it's happening all the time.
And one last question on this before we move on to the next topic, and that would be, what would you say the purpose is of this? Is it psychological manipulation, population control, weather modification, or some other reason?
Well, it's an undisclosed project. It's a black project. So we don't know. And it's their fault that we have to theorize. If they would just give disclosure and say this is why we're doing it, they wouldn't be forcing us to theorize what the conspiracy is. So they're forcing us to be conspiracy theorists. Having said that, since I don't know, we can just speculate. I can tell you what the most popular speculation is. Okay, so there's actually one reason is weaponized against us. What I mean is, okay, chemtrails don't exist. You're a crazy conspiracy theorist if you think they do. But if they do exist, they're there to save you from global warming. Okay, so basically, if you start waking up and realizing what's going on, then they're hoping to trap you in propaganda that it's there to save you from global warming. Now, I want to mention just briefly is that it doesn't cool down the planet, it warms up the planet. Although it can locally cool down a region. So if it's a hot sunny day, they come in with a spray campaign, which by the way I'm sure is drone. That's why there's not more whistleblowers than there are. They come in with a spray campaign. Yes, it can block a high noon hot sun and make it feel a bit cooler. But when nighttime comes and the heat is radiating back out of the mountains and back out of the water and the earth, back out into space, it hits this insulated metallic blanket of nano aluminum particles. And because these are like randomly shaped particles, they start bouncing around in random direction, and the thermal radiation gets all kind of stuck in these clouds. It literally creates global warming. So although they're trying to spread disinformation that if it does exist, it's here to save you, really, it's the opposite. So as far as the conspiracy theories go, it's to create global warming, to justify the carbon tax, to try to compensate for the fact that their plans are not working out. We're actually going into a next small ice age. 2, it's a weapons-based system where all of the top secret exotic weapon systems are based on high energy, like lasers and other high energy type of systems that can be either in orbit or ground-based. For example, the U.S. military just put lasers on their Navy ships last year, right? And like a laser works much more efficiently in a metallic plasma than it does just in regular open air. So there's a possibility that the Defense Department, has interest in this. Like I said, it's not just one agenda. Then it also creates a perfect projection screen. So you could project a holographic image onto a metallic plasma, whereas you couldn't do that just in open air. So if there's any truth to Project Bluebeam, where they're developing the technology to project objects in the air, then there would be an application there. There's less exotic ideas such as just general. It's just a general war on the population. It's like a slow kill. We're being sprayed like bugs. They don't want to kill us off too fast, so we don't, stand up and stop it. But just generally, like, spraying us with unhealthy chemicals to just generally weaken the population, a general attack on our immune systems. And also, it could be a doomsday weapon for the elite. So what I mean is that the infrastructure's in place. The robot planes are flying. They exist. They've been built. The flight paths are active. All they have to do is change the canisters from something that's, mildly toxic to something that's instantly lethal, and they could just shut down an entire country. They could just knock everyone over to sleep or put them to death in an entire country. So it's probably would never be used, but just like they have nuclear weapons that can take out an entire country, and they're hoping to never use them, there may be some sort of ultimate population control kind of infrastructure that's being built right now. But the thing is, we don't know. It's not my fault. It's not our fault that we have to come up with these crazy ideas. Like, maybe just one of the things I said is true and the rest are crazy, but it's not our fault. They have to have disclosure, tell us what it's for, and then we'll just know.
And again, lots more we could say on this subject, and thanks for sharing your knowledge and information on that. And I just wanted again to say, anyone listening, let me know what you think about chemtrails, your thoughts and feelings about it. Just go to our website again, www.truthsentinel.co.uk, and write in the chat box or leave a voicemail. So the next topic, our final topic, is alternative energy. You mentioned to me that you'd met John Hutchinson, and I wasn't actually sure who it was, but I checked, and for people not familiar with his work, he's reported to have created some forms of free energy. And do you think it would be fair to say he's kind of associated with the work of Nikola Tesla?
Yeah, he definitely, continuing on Tesla's work, specifically because his experiments are using Tesla coils.
Yeah, and he's famous for his work with alternative energies. There's videos you can see of him levitating objects. You actually met him. Did you ever witness any levitation of heavy objects?
No, I didn't witness the active tests, but I was introduced to him from Jean Manning, who's an author of The Coming Energy Revolution and Breakthrough Power. She's lifelong family friends with John Hutchinson, and Hutchinson had a secret underground laboratory in Vancouver about 20 years ago where these Tesla coils were being modified, and he was achieving very uncontrollable and unpredictable events. But some of these events were spontaneous fires just starting up on a concrete floor and just going out. One time a forklift was dragged sideways across the floor, 20 feet. And there was a lot of levitation and phasing out of this reality happening. And it actually goes back to the Philadelphia experiment, where the Einstein and Tesla were working on a project to try to make a U.S. naval ship radar invisible. And Einstein had some theory about if you can rotate something 5 degrees, then you could phase it out of this reality just enough so that a radar wave could pass through the ship. And it was all based on Tesla coils. And then the whole story about the Philadelphia experiment, where it was rotated more than 5 degrees and it became more than just radar invisible, it became light spectrum invisible. And somehow when the ship rematerialized, there was deaths because people were rematerialized with part of their limbs and bulkheads and everything. These Tesla coils were producing similar effects with John Hutchinson's work. And so what would happen is he would have test objects, and they would sit there for hours and hours and nothing would happen. He'd have to put in like 8 hours of tape and keep changing tapes, VHS tapes. And it would take like on average like 8 hours plus before anything would happen. And it was completely unpredictable. And sometimes there was three different types of levitation. There was one kind where it just shot up to the ceiling in a burst, hit the ceiling and fell back down. The other kind where it would just rise up about like an inch and just slowly rotate and then come down. And then the other kind is that it would rise up many feet, but always in an arc, and gently rise up in an arc like a rainbow shape, and then gently come back down. So then he tried experiment. Okay, what happens if I don't let it move? So he took a metal file and sandwiched it really tight between two pieces of 2x4 screwed together and screwed it to the ground. And again, having to wait hours and hours, and then finally the effect happened. It turned white hot and exploded. And then all the pieces, after they cooled down, all the pieces were magnetized in a way that they did not want to go back together again. So all the pieces opposed each other. And so there was many experiments like that. And this is in Vancouver, Canada. So he was infiltrated. A supposed partner, who was actually a Canadian government collaborator, became his business partner. And when Hutchinson was away for a weekend, this infiltrator wired up the Tesla coils to explode. The next time Hutchinson turned them all on, they blew up, and there's PCBs, supposedly PCB contamination. And immediately the appropriate Canadian Environment Agency was there, closing down his lab. And then he had to fight through the courts for many months to get access to his own lab. And when he got back, when he was able to finally legally cut the padlock off of his door, most of his samples were missing, and there was some that were in the process of being packaged, and even some addresses to some different European laboratories. And these samples were like shipped all over the world. So now his equipment is sabotaged, a lot of his stuff is missing, and then he gets an offer to relocate to Europe and have a pretty much an unlimited amount of funds to pursue his work for the good of humanity. So it's kind of like a dream come true for him. So he gets lured over there and ends up drugged up, addicted to some drug, but working in this lab. And then it took some time before Gene Manning raised up enough money to like afford a trip over there to rescue him and bring him back. And these samples that were shipped out, like some of these samples defy the laws of physics. And I personally was like allowed to just play with a box of these samples while Gene was having a meeting one time. One of these samples looked like broccoli. It was a metal bolt. It looked like broccoli. And I said, "What's this?" And he goes, "Oh, it's platinum and nickel," or something. Totally casual. And he ended up letting me take it to get it tested. And then I took it to a jeweler, and they said they weren't sure what it was. And I took it to another jeweler, and he said it's like 5% platinum and something else. And I ended up losing it. I was like a teenager then. But yeah, that's how casual this guy is. He's a very interesting character. It's like he's not excited that he made platinum, 5% platinum out of a bolt. Like he's this crazy inventor with this wild hair and these crazy glasses and kind of an intuitive inventor.
He hasn't exactly been welcomed by the scientific community, is that right? I mean, do you think that's because he's got no degrees or academic background?
Well, if he's defying laws of physics, that's not a popular thing to be doing. He was welcomed enough to have seven government cameras come in and film his effects from the United States. I I have to, we're just touching on the topic here.
Yeah.
Another time I can come with exact dates and locations and figures. But some government American agency brought 7 cameras and had them rolling with 7 different angles for a few days, catching these effects. And so one of the samples was it was this kind of metal bar like a pencil, and it was magnetic, but it only worked on one end. And I asked him about that. I said, "Oh, what's this?" And he says, "Oh, that's the world's first monopole magnet," which didn't mean anything to me. I only looked it up recently what that is, and it's actually a theoretical concept that scientists don't know if they'll ever find one. But if they could produce one or find one, then they speculate that you could have unlimited space flight travel. Something about if it only has a north and not a south, then you could just be floating in space and point it towards a gravitational field, like a distant star or planet, and be pulled towards it. I don't know anything about that, but it's interesting. It was just a simple pencil-shaped solid piece of metal that it would pick up a coin or a paper clip from one end and not the other. Another sample was a block of aluminum and a block of wood that had levitated and slowly moved through each other, kind of phased, like this Einstein rotation phasing, whatever that's all about, and then re-solidified. And so you've got this block of wood that has the cellular structure, but it's all made out of aluminum, and it's like an impossible thing. And then there's a kind of a famous like spoon inside the aluminum block that's been like ground away to show people. And the most common thing was like exploded bars of metal. Like if you take like a big 10-pound 2-inch by 2-inch by 6-inch block of iron or brass or bronze, and it gets pregnant from the middle and explodes out from the middle. So there's some sort of strange events going on. But that's Hutchinson. He also claims to have created a free energy battery, and he's made a couple of hundred of these and sold them. People put orders on them, like people kind of inside his circle, and he's refusing to tell how they're made, but it's very simple. It's some sort of epoxy mixed with some crushed different types of crystals. It's like, and 2 wires coming out of it. It looks like a cement form, and 2 wires coming out of it, and he's claiming that there's some sort of differential, but he's very eccentric.
Yeah, and that brings up an interesting subject. Like, if someone did create free energy, does anyone think they would be allowed to just market it? I mean, there's going to be plenty of people who would be against it, isn't there?
Well, there's laws in place to prevent it. Like in Canada, for example, there's a classification of patent applications called disruptive technology, and they can legally be classified for national security, and they're referring to like national economic security. Most disruptive technologies are referring to economic disruption. And the idea is that if you disrupt a national revenue source, for example, like in Canada, we mine more uranium than anyone else in the world. So if I came up with an invention that replaces uranium with something else that's easy to produce, that can legally be confiscated from me and classified under national security, and I'm not allowed to talk about it or pursue it or admit that there was a confiscation. So basically, the patent office, that's like going to a robber and asking, should I be robbed?
Yeah, and when John was asked, because apparently he hasn't really demonstrated the results of the experiments more recently, and when he was asked as why not, he said that he's had his work destroyed by the government, and that they use his technology to take down the Twin Towers on 9/11. Did you know about that as well?
No, I didn't. That's interesting.
He did do some work for the military, is that right?
Well, the 7 cameras I was talking about, I have to look up the details, but I believe that was the Defense Department in the States.
Right, yeah. I mean, I was looking on YouTube. He's got plenty of people trying to debunk him and everything, but also seems to be plenty of people that taking him seriously. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, Mateus. Really sorry about that, but I know we were going to talk about breakaway society, secret space programs, GMO foods, and so that just makes me think you must come back on again and talk about these topics in more detail and include some of those other topics we were going to talk about as well.
Definitely, I have to come back and warn you why to not eat the BT GMO corn if it's the only thing you do for food awareness. Do that next time.
I always have problems with my diet anyway. There's too many things I eat that I shouldn't be eating, so you might as well add that to the list.
Yeah, well, this is the only one that bores microscopic holes in your stomach. Definitely have to cover that one soon.
I might give that a miss, although doesn't Coca-Cola do the same?
No, that just dissolves your teeth, and actually, I don't know about what Coca-Cola does.
I think it probably does. I think it probably does dissolve your teeth, actually, if you had it in your mouth long enough. Yeah.
Yeah, there's been cases where people are at parties and are having like vodka and Coke and pass out in such a way that a couple of their teeth are like sitting in a pool of Coke overnight. It does dissolve. If
you want to clean a coin as well, you just leave it in a glass of Coca-Cola overnight, and it's like brand new by the next morning. So that probably says a lot. But thank you ever so much for coming on and talking to us. So really interesting topics and more topics as well. I know that you could talk about and more detail you can go into. So we'll leave a bit of a gap, and then we'll invite you back on again soon. And again, anyone listening, please contact us and let us know what you think about what Mateus has been talking about. But thank you again, Mateus, and thanks again for the music as well at the beginning of our program.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and thanks for having me. I'm going to send you some backup information and links to some of the things we've been talking about. So if anybody wants to get it more from the source regarding these topics, then they'll have a chance to do that.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll put that up on the website. And also, if anyone wants to listen to your music, which is on at the beginning of our program, you have a YouTube channel as well, don't you?
No, you're discovering me. So I've got pretty much nobody except my girlfriend and me knows about the music that you're opening and closing your show with, and I've got lots of other music just as good or better that no one's ever heard before. So who knows? Maybe we'll have a chance to switch up the music once in a while and rotate some other songs.
Yeah, okay. And if anyone is interested in the music or anything Mateus has talked about and wants to contact him personally, just contact me, scottsentinel9@gmail.com, and I'll forward your details on to Mateus. But thanks again, Mateus. Take it easy.
Thank you, Scott. Keep up the good fight. Have a great day.
You too. And goodbye to everyone listening. Thanks again. Have a great week.